Alright, so I'm not trying to steal thunder from another YouTube channel. Cough, cough. But I got a theory. I got to thinking, I know, shocking, right? But I thought of something that I thought would be really interesting to explore. After seeing the WandaVision trailer, I thought, there's something there. There's something pulling at the back of my mind. And that led me down a spiral. It led me to a lot of different places, a lot of different threads, but eventually I landed on one theory that I thought was so interesting that I wanted to share it with you guys. You've read the title, but now let's work backwards and see how we got there. Before we do, as always, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so let's start out with, what do we know for certain? Well, we know the show is called WandaVision. And we also know that the show will tie directly into Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness unless something has changed in the last few months. We also know that Vision is back. Somehow. We know that Wanda is there, obviously, and we also know that Monica Rambeau, Jimmy Woo, and Darcy Lewis will be making an appearance, and we also know, unless those were faked somehow, that set photos have revealed that SWORD, the organization that Nick Fury is working for allegedly with the Skrulls, is going to play some role. Now, what do we think we know? Well, we think that this takes place in Wanda's head somehow, right? There's no other way that Vision could be alive. We also know that theoretically the Illuminati, as portrayed in the comic books, might be coming to the MCU. And we also maybe know that Wanda might be the villain of Doctor Strange 2. On top of that, Catherine Hahn is going to be in this show, and she might be playing a witch named Agatha Harkness. Okay, so there's some groundwork. Now let's talk about the title of this video. And in this video, as you can see, we're going to be talking about villains in some capacity. And before I get started on, the theory itself, I want to talk about what makes a good villain in my eyes. For those of you who have been watching me for a little bit, you guys know what I think about villains. I think the best villains are the ones who believe that what they're doing is right. See, villains aren't villains because they're evil. Villains are villains because they take good ideals and put them to another extreme. A pretty bad extreme, but just an extreme. We all know that Thanos believed that the population should be cut in half, but it was for quote-unquote good reasons. Killmonger was the closest to being right out of all the villains in the MCU because he believed that aid should be given to his brothers and sisters across the globe. The Vulture just wanted to protect his family and just took it too far. These are good villains. And I want to give you a fourth example. Now I know in Civil War, Iron Man is not the quote-unquote villain. But if you think about it, in a lot of ways, he does actually fill the role of an antagonist for much of the movie. Zemo kind of works as the quote-unquote Emperor Palpatine of that film, while Iron Man is just sort of a puppet, in a sense, like Darth Vader. And if you think about it like that, this scenario in Civil War is actually the most applicable to what we're talking about today in WandaVision. Because Iron Man is a hero, he has good ideals. But in Civil War, he took them a little too far, and thus we got the conflict between him and Captain America. So now we posit the theory that is before us today. Doctor Strange is going to be the villain of WandaVision, and Wanda is going to be the villain of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Now this theory isn't really based on much that we've seen, like evidence, per se. It's not based on a set photo of Benedict Cumberbatch being at the WandaVision set or anything like that. It's more just me speculating of what would make a good narrative based on what we do know about the show and about Phase 4 of the MCU. So let's paint a picture. After the events of Age of Ultron, Infinity War, and Endgame, Wanda Maximoff is devastated. And who can blame her? She lost her home, her brother, and Vision. So, what would she do? Well, let's work under the simple assumption that she's just trying to bring Vision back to life, seeing that everyone else has gotten their loved ones back. Like, for example, at the end of Endgame, maybe it was intentional that she was with Hawkeye, because Hawkeye got his family back, but she didn't. She didn't get anybody back, because they died, quote-unquote, for real. Okay, so once that happens, let's say she traps herself, or kind of imprisons her mind in this alternate reality. And what I would envision... Get it? Envision? Okay, anyways. But what I would envision is that while her mind internally begins to warp to another dimension, externally, because think about it, externally she wouldn't entirely be there, like she wouldn't be in the present, she would begin to destroy things with her powers, like her powers would begin to go haywire. So we know SWORD is involved. So let's say that Wanda suddenly decides to just, go crazy, right? But she doesn't really know it, she's trapped in her own reality. But externally, she's just blowing everything up and becoming this arsenal, like this nuclear weapon of sorts. So SWORD is called in, and that's kind of where Jimmy Woo, Darcy Lewis, and I guess Monica Rambeau come in. I'm not entirely sure. But anyways, SWORD comes in and tries to prevent this. I would imagine Sword to be a mix between S.H.I.E.L.D. and the good S.H.I.E.L.D., not the Hydra Shield. Actual Sword from the comics and the Illuminati. I'm just guessing at this, by the way. But Nick Fury's up in space, but maybe there's a Sword division down on Earth. I don't know. So Sword is called in, and Sword is just seriously outmatched. And we see in the trailer that Monica Rambeau is being kicked out of somewhere. So my theory is that after what she saw in Captain Marvel, and from Captain Marvel, you know, because her mom was such close friends with her, that she decides to become an agent of Sword, I guess. And they send her into this alternate dimension to see what's happening. And she gets blasted back out. We see in the trailer that she's kind of surrounded by the red light of Scarlet Witch, and that's how she gets her powers. Anyways, that's kind of how I think she fits into the story. Not super important, but yeah, there it is. And I actually think this takes place very early on, if the theory is correct, because then what happens is that Sword is like, okay, we can't handle her. So they call Nick Fury, who is, I guess, the director of Sword, director of S.H.I.E.L.D. now, director of Sword, I don't know. Anyways, he's like, okay. So he calls on his old friend, who he's never met, Doctor Strange. Because he knows that Doctor Strange is at least a wizard, or a sorcerer, right? And he knows that he can maybe deal with these kinds of threats. And so Doctor Strange comes in, and he's like, okay, we gotta contain this before it gets out of hand, because she's destroying literally everything. So what does Doctor Strange do? And again, what's the reason behind him not going in the dimension himself? I'm not entirely sure, but let's just say he calls in an old friend, maybe a rogue agent of sorts, named Agatha Harkness. Because guys, Agatha Harkness is a witch. Doctor Strange is a wizard of sorts. He is a sorcerer. Is it that far of a stretch to say that Agatha Harkness was once part of the Sanctum Sanctorum? I don't think so. And again, for those of you who are going to be going in the comments and saying, well, Agatha Harkness in the comics, but Marvel never really paid attention to the comics when it came to the minor details. They follow the larger brushstrokes, but they don't really pay attention to the details. They don't make Civil War. Like, they don't adapt it directly from the comics. They make their own stories. There's no airport battle in the comic books. And so Agatha Harkness is sent into the alternate dimension, and again, I don't know why Doctor Strange didn't go himself, but anyways, yeah, she's sent in to kind of spy on Wanda and make sure that she's being contained from the inside, while Doctor Strange and Sword are containing her from the outside. And so we get our usual hijinks, and eventually, throughout the entire story, it's kind of revealed to Wanda that she's being controlled from the outside by an external force. Agatha is just sort of the decoy, in a sense. And so I would imagine at the end of WandaVision that she's going to defeat Agatha Harkness, and she's going to realize that Doctor Strange, or she's going to realize that somebody has been trying to control her from the outside. And she's going to try to break free, and she's going to be successful, and she's going to realize that it was Doctor Strange, and that's when she rips open the multiverse and goes crazy, and now she's upset at Doctor Strange, and thus we have Doctor Strange 2 in the Multiverse of Madness. There's where the story starts, the inciting incident. And I have to put a giant asterisk in front of all of this because to me, none of this would be revealed until the last 5 minutes of the show. Something like Wanda finally breaks free of the prison and she opens her eyes to reality, and what does she see? She sees Doctor Strange standing in front of her, who's been trying to control her the entire time, right? And then she rips open the multiverse, and that's how the season ends. Now what does this do narratively? Well, let's go back to the idea of a good villain. A good villain is one who believes what they're doing is right. And oftentimes, the good villains will operate in a gray area. You have the rare cases like the Joker, for example, but in most instances, the best villains are the ones that operate in the gray area. And if you want to really see gray area and want to look at an antagonist, let's look at Civil War and Iron Man. He operates entirely in a gray area because he believes what he's doing is right, and he just goes to the extreme, just a little bit far. So, is it a stretch to say that Doctor Strange being an overarching villain of WandaVision, is that really a stretch? Because let's look at it from his perspective. He's trying to contain Wanda, and he uses whatever force he can to do so. From Wanda's perspective, he's trying to control her and trying to take away her idyllic life that she's been able to get in her alternate reality. And so, when we see Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, when she becomes the villain, all of a sudden, what that does is that she becomes sympathetic. We have two sympathetic villains, empathetic villains, that we understand where they're coming from. We understand why they're doing what they're doing. And honestly, are either of them right or wrong? Not really. It's up to you to decide. So those are my quick thoughts on WandaVision. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you want to see some more videos, check out the videos on the screen right now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.